if you wouldn't mind just telling me a little bit about yourself, like what is your life? What do you do?
Yeah.
And how does Roam fit into that?
I am currently based in Berkeley in California. I'm a program lead at a company called the Partnership on AI, which is a nonprofit that is trying to develop and shape the development of AI in a responsible way. And so I'm very interested in futurism type topics and trying to create good outcomes for the future, basically using technology or other mechanisms. So that was kind of that's why I ended up moving over here, was to work on more AI safety, AI strategy type things. I I got into Roam actually because I read a blog post on Less Wrong, which is a blog for people who are interested in rationality and AI and futurism and that kind of thing. And somebody had described the Zettelkasten method on that, and they talked about Roam research. This was, I think, in like fall last year in 2019. And so I think it was when Roam was still very like much in like secret mode, and so this was not many
Mm-hmm.
people knew about it, and I started playing around with it, and I felt like I didn't quite catch on immediately. Like I played around with it, and I could see how it was useful for very quickly jotting down thoughts, like the outliner aspect of it. And I'd played with like Workflowy and Dynalist in the past, but I have never been someone who has been really good at taking notes. Like I've never managed to keep a journal consistently. I was never someone who took great notes at university. I will read books and I just wouldn't take any highlights or notes or anything, and then of course forget about it immediately. So I've just never been someone who has been very good at having a note-taking habit. So I like played around with Roam, but didn't quite feel like it stuck for me. And then I can't remember exactly why I decided to pick it up again, but it was around December. And I think I had made like a New Year's resolution to myself to like write more. And so I thought, okay, the first step to that is going to be to get better at note taking. So I ended up revisiting Roam and just like committed to trying it for like really, you know, going for it properly for like a month. And then during that time, it just started to become indispensable, and I was putting everything in it. That was the only way I could keep track of my life and my thoughts, and just found like a lot more connections happening and things like that. So yeah, then I went pretty pretty full in by that point.
Yeah, that's one of it's funny you say that. That's like one of my pieces of advice that I always tell people when they're just starting to use Roam. I'm just like, okay, starting now, every thought that you have goes in there. I
Yeah,
don't care what it is. I don't care how like big or small it is, just put it in there. And over time you'll start to get like a sense of what actually needs to go in there and what doesn't, but there's not really all that much of a cost to putting just everything in there. So
yeah.
just do it all.
Yeah, I think one of the biggest issues I had, and maybe I think a lot of people have this, is that they feel like they need to move over all of that other information into their latest tool and do like a big export and then an import. And I
Yeah.
think I was kind of hung up on that because, again, from all of my previous attempts at building a journal habit or whatever, I'd like accumulated all these random piles of notes in like Day One or like Dynalist or wherever. And so I was like, kind of hung up on how to import those, and it took me a while to just sort of let that go and think it will happen naturally. I'm just going to start capturing and not worry too much about this like massive pile of stuff that I need to somehow get into Roam.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, I think that helped to kind of just start fresh and just go for it. And I actually have imported quite a lot of that old stuff now, but I just did it over time as it became clear that Roam was useful, and as I got to understand better what Roam was useful for, and therefore which notes it would make sense to bring over.
Right. Yeah, definitely. I mean, it's like it's definitely a more enjoyable app when you don't start off your experience with a big chore.
Yes, absolutely. I think a lot of people who are like me, who like procrastinate by tinkering with new productivity tools, probably also feel this thing where they're like, this is the one new true tool that I'm going to stick with forever, and therefore I need to like dump everything into it and like really invest in it. And then a few months later you find the next new thing and you wish you hadn't spent all your time going through that process. And so I'm really trying hard to avoid that, though I still definitely fall into that trap myself a lot.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, same. One reason why I was really excited to talk to you is just that you say you use both Roam and Obsidian. So
Yeah.
those are essentially two different writing tools. A lot of people think of them as competitors, but it seems to me that you use them sort of symbiotically. And so I'm really curious, like, how is it that each of those tools fit into your life? And, if you could show us any examples like along the way.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, it's funny that people compare them as competitors, because I would actually put Rome um, more as a competitor to Dynalist, which is actually the team behind Obsidian. Are also the team that built Dynalist. So it's funny that people have like latched onto Obsidian as being the competitor, when I would really put it as Dynalist, due to the kind of outlining nature of it. I think the main thing is people picking up on this idea of like backlinks, and I guess, yeah, maybe there's some other aspects to it, but yeah, for me they're very different. Rome is where I jot down all anything that occurs to me. It's very messy. It's very like high context. Like probably to other people, it's not going to make a lot of sense. My personal Rome, whereas Obsidian is where I write things up into more human readable and publishable formats. So this is my Rome, and I have things like my tasks in it. I do a notes retro, which I'm happy to talk about as well. I have my journal, like I just kind of like jot things down in my journal by just writing that tag whenever something happens. So it's very, I think there's a term called interstitial journaling that I've heard people talk about, where rather than like sitting down at the end of the day and writing a full thing, you just kind of do it throughout the day. And so I'm trying to do that a bit more. So like on a video call with Rob, you're in my room. And
Oh,
then
incredible.
and then yeah, so this is where I capture things. And then like I will also capture any random thoughts that come to me using this thoughts tag. And this is just like really short snippets that may not make sense to anyone else, but like capture something that was happening in my brain at the time. And I do pretty much all of my Roam work from daily pages and just link out to other pages. And I go to the other pages when I want to like filter through and like pull out specific things. But really most of the content is happening in the daily pages.
Hmm.
And then when I want to write something more formal or public, I will go to Obsidian. Currently, I use blot.im for my personal website, which has my blog posts and notes on. And this folder, which is my Obsidian Vault, is also the folder that Blot is using to serve the website. So if I make a change in here, it will directly immediately happen on my website, which, you know, some people might not like, but to be honest, any barrier to entry to getting work
Mm.
online will make me less likely to actually do it. So this works for me. Okay, so if I find like this note on be prolific, and if I change this to like hello test, then in theory this should immediately be reflected here.
So that's really interesting, because like, so what I'm doing right now, I'm similarly like trying to start publishing like my thoughts in a way that's legible to others.
Yeah,
So like I have a public Roam, and my public Roam is already much more legible than my private Roam. But at the same time, like I'm not going to be able to share that with people outside of like the Roam
the Roam.
community.
Yeah,
So it's like I'm starting to do something a little bit more file based. I'm using a little bit different of a system. I'm using Bear, and I'm doing that in conjunction with something that's like Markdown file based, where
right.
once I update those, then it's going to update my website.
Okay.
And so like I guess what I think is interesting and what I want to hear more about is why you like having it automatically update as you're editing those notes, because to me that sounds a little bit daunting.
Terrifying.
Like I
Yeah,
want to have like a little bit more control over like when something goes up, because like a lot of times the pages themselves are pretty messy until I have it go up.
yeah.
So yeah, I just kind of want to hear about that.
So basically the way I think about it is that Roam is where I'm going to do all the messy stuff, and then by the time I want to transfer it to Obsidian, I should be probably, I don't know, it's not going to be fully thought through, because a lot of my notes are actually still like stubs. Like I have a to do things. These are all public still, but like they're not like, this is just a link. It's not actually written out, and so it's there online just because why not? But I still need to do a lot of work on it. But if there is something that I don't want to publish until it's like fully done, I can use this drafts folder, which doesn't have anything in it at the moment, but anything in your drafts folder doesn't get served to the blot website. So I can always draft things in those and then move them into another folder and it will automatically appear. But the reason I did it was like, it's very easy, I think, to have a perfectionist mindset, and like all of these to-do notes, I could have kept private until I was ready, but like, I just felt like I was having conversations with people and I would want to share with them some like half-baked thoughts I had on the topic. And instead of having that stuck in like some private thing, just have it online. Like probably no one's going to stumble across this unless I share it with them. So I'm not too worried about like, I don't know, people reading these and assuming this is like me putting out my finished product. Like these are just very rough little notes. So I think, yeah, personally it feels fine to me to have these little stubs up there which can serve a purpose. But if there was something I was a bit more cautious about, I would just do it in the drafts folder. But yeah, I think mostly it's down to the fact that I have Obsidian for writing up these polish notes and Roam for doing the messy thinking behind the scenes. I did actually start off having a public Roam, and I was like, oh, this is going to be great. I'm just going to like write directly in my public Roam, and that's going to be the place where I share notes with people. And probably you found the same thing, that like, yeah, if you're not in the Roam community and you don't really know how to navigate it, it's so confusing to be shared like a Roam link and like be like, what is going on here? And also there's just at the moment on public Roams, there's like weird things that I would want to hide from the user, like the daily notes section and things like that. So and I did manage to hack some CSS together to make it so that those things just like weren't visible, but it just didn't felt very smooth or nice. And I think there's something nice about having a vault of markdown files that feel very future proof anyway. So like even if I could have a public Roam that was much more easy to navigate, like maybe I'll switch to that. But I actually do really like having just like a set of slightly more polished thoughts that are in a very standardized format that I know I can port to many different tools, or like it's just like something that is I'm probably going to be able to access in many years time, even if Roam goes under. And I hope I don't lose all of the stuff I put in Roam. I'll have to export that to Markdown at some point as well. But yeah, I think there's just something nice about having that like slight separation between the messy outliner, jot down quick thoughts aspect, and then the more like polished, longer term things that you store in Obsidian or Markdown.
To me, yeah, like writing everything you said, absolutely. You know, but like also writing in these files on a page as opposed to in an outliner, it just kind of prompts me towards writing in a little bit more polished of a way. I don't know if you experience the same thing, because it's like if I'm writing in Roam and I'm not using the indentation to express meaning in the way Roam understands, I feel like I'm wasting Roam, you know? And so as a result, it just ends up coming out differently than it would if I'm like writing something for other people to read, you know? And so one thing I'm really curious about then is when you're writing stuff into these files in Obsidian, like what does the pipeline look like for that? Like, are you just starting writing an idea directly in there? Or alternatively, are you collecting your thoughts within Roam in some sort of way and then eventually turning it into an output in Obsidian? And if so, I'd be really curious to see like an example of that maybe.
Yeah, it's definitely more of the latter. So I do most of my trying to build connections and thinking things through in Roam. So if I go to my writing inbox, this has a load of stuff that I use as like inputs to like my writing process. So every time I come across a question I want to understand more, I will tag it as a question in my daily notes. And then when I come to my writing inbox, I can just like scroll down and see all of the questions that I've had recently. And that can be like a prompt for the kinds of things I might want to write about. But like it could also be like the thoughts that I jotted down, any thoughts that I have. So one way that I will often do it is go to my thoughts page,
One thing I just want to point out real quick that I think is really cool is just like with the way that you set up the backlinks there, on the writing inbox page, it essentially turned the backlinks into an index for you.
Yeah.
That you didn't really need to write directly into the writing inbox,
Yes.
which I thought was really cool.
This is a new pattern that I started using. I used to just like literally write out like in the page itself the links that were relevant, and I just realized like, why am I doing this when I can use the backlink functionality and just tag the like places I want this thing to show up, and then it automatically shows up there. So I'm experimenting with that at the moment, and it's working out pretty well. And yeah, I would definitely encourage people to experiment with that instead of writing out like full on index pages.
Can we
So
just dig into that for just a
yeah.
second more before we move on to this? Because this is something that I'm like starting to play around with a little bit more as well. Because like, okay, probably started off my Roam usage where, at least for the first few months, like 3 to 5 months or so, almost everything was in the daily notes, you know,
Hmm.
and so it would all show up in linked references for whatever the pages were. Then I ended up starting to work on my public Roam. And because I was trying to make it legible to other people, it was all within the pages.
Yeah.
And the backlinks would populate from the content of each of those pages, you
Yeah.
know, but the pages themselves were meant to express the thoughts.
Yeah.
And I ended up finding that a lot more easily navigable for
Yeah.
me. Like if I were trying to find a specific piece of information, it just felt easier to me that way.
Hmm.
So I'm curious how this experiment's been going for you.
Hmm.
If you've been experiencing something similar to what I've described, or it, yeah, I'm just curious your thoughts on that.
Yeah, so I did a similar thing actually when I tried to build a public Roam. I did the same thing. You know, I put the content in the page itself rather than the linked references. And I think that is more navigable. But personally, I just find that like um, future Rosie is so different to present Rosie that if present Rosie tries to anticipate what future Rosie wants in these files, like she always gets it wrong. And so instead,
Mm,
what I do by writing it in the daily pages, like for example, I don't have like a goals page where I list out all my goals because my goals change so frequently. Like I can start at the beginning of 2020 and think, okay, here are my goals for 2020. I'll make a page for them, and then like a couple of months later, I look back and I'm like, well, those are not the goals that I want to keep, and then I have to either edit that page directly, in which case I lose some of the context in terms of like why I wanted those goals in the first place. And so yeah, like that doesn't work very well. So instead, I write a tag like goals 2020 in the day that I'm coming up with those goals, and I write the goals underneath. And then, like a month later, if I want to change those goals, I can do the same thing. And if I click on the goals 2020 page, I can just see how my thoughts evolved over the year. And
mm,
that just feels like, for me, that's the benefit of Roam for the messy side of things. And then if I wanted to write a public page of like Rosie's goals for 2020, that would be something I would do in Obsidian and would be written directly, obviously, in that goals 2020 page. And I wouldn't keep the like the version history almost of like my thought process. It would just be a snapshot of like
mm.
whatever the most up to date thinking I had at that time. But my Roam like tracks the changes that I go through, and how my thinking evolves, which is something I really like about it actually. And I'm really surprised that more note-taking apps haven't used this like daily notes concept very much before. Like it just, for me at least, it's like such a great design pattern to just have a default place to put your notes on any given day and to be able to see how your thinking has evolved over time. And yeah, I'm kind of surprised
Mm-hmm.
that like people hadn't already been doing this. So yeah, if I wanted to write something, I would probably come to my thoughts page and then I would like filter it by the topic I was interested in. And then I would just like, let's pick an example. Like if I wanted to write about Newcomb's paradox, I can just see all the things I have tagged thoughts wise under Newcomb's paradox. And then I would like use this as like starting to form my ideas together to write something more concrete in Obsidian. I used to write more like evergreen note type notes in here. So I have like longer titles. Like there's many things seem to make sense theoretically, but aren't borne out in the real world, and vice versa, which is like something I was starting to write as like a Andy style evergreen note. And I have some of these in Roam that I use to link related concepts together, but ultimately the write-up of that happens in Obsidian, and that's the thing that I put out there. But I use them to like tag ideas that are relevant and related that I might want to then go and update the equivalent Obsidian note for. But I know you've also had some like questions around how do you keep them in sync if you've got like stuff in your private Roam and then you've got stuff in Obsidian or wherever that you're publishing. And that is also something I'm experimenting with, and I haven't really figured that out at the moment. I think roughly I'm moving away from trying to maintain a set of like polished notes in Roam at all. And I just use these headings as like idea linking. And then it's in Obsidian where I will write up the full version of that idea. So they're not really copies of each other. I use the title just as a linking mechanism, but then yeah, the actual content lives in Obsidian.
Interesting. Yeah. So like you might even just specify to yourself like, okay, this lives in this location, but you just have the title there, so that way you're able. Yeah, I like that. That's interesting.
Yeah, and I mean, I have like, so if I click on this one, I will probably have, well, I don't know, we'll see what comes up. I might have something. So yeah, it looks like I haven't actually tried to write anything out in this, but I just have like every time an idea came to me that is relevant to this concept, I'll just tag it, and then I can write this up more thoroughly for publishing elsewhere, and use these as like prompts for that, if that makes sense.
Yeah, makes total sense. Makes total sense. I'd say one other question that I have, I mean, I say one other question there, I'm gonna have more questions, but but it's like, okay, so something else that I've felt as a little bit of a struggle is like I put my more evergreen notes into a digital garden or into something that's meant to go onto online publishing of some form, whether you use term digital garden or not, but it's like, so I put it in there, and it's more polished, and as a result it feels like that almost becomes a more useful and more fruitful ground for thinking through things in the first place. And so like in my public Roam, for example, like I think that works really well, especially because of all the block references, like that I'm able to use this text and remix it in all of these different ways. And then in my private Roam, like I do have some pages that are like just the page titles that are meant to kind of keep things in sync, like you describe. But yeah, it just feels to me like, okay, these thoughts are getting published here, but they'd be more useful if they're in my private thinking space as a place for me to remix things. So is that an issue you felt, or is that just a non-issue for you?
It hasn't come up yet, but that just might be because I'm still pretty early in this whole workflow process, and so it may well end up being that way. I think what I would do in that case is just like copy over the text that I had written in Obsidian and put it in my under a tag in my daily pages, and not think too hard about where it would, like I wouldn't put it under the page title, because again, I might want to update it and the versions would, like I'd have to overwrite that stuff. So I just put it in the daily notes page with the tag of the title and like the content that I'd copied over from Obsidian, and then it would be there for me to find whenever I'm like again coming up with that concept. But I probably wouldn't spend too much time trying to make sure they were perfectly in sync. I would just, every time like I'm like, this would be useful in Roam, I'd just copy that bit over and just make sure it was in there somewhere. Because I think that's one of the benefits of Roam, is that it is easy to find stuff when you need it just by typing your double brackets and looking for the right word, and things pop up. So yeah, I wouldn't spend too much time like fretting over exactly where it should go or like polishing it up in any way.
Oh, so you use the daily notes to help you version things. Is that accurate? Yeah.
Yeah, totally. Interesting. Yeah. And like I know Roam has like a versioning feature built in, but I am a little nervous about using that just because if I want to export my notes, then that's, I don't know how exactly that would work. And also it doesn't feel like quite the thing that I want at the moment. Like I want to be able to date the versions. One thing I did try doing was like using GitHub on my local Markdown files, and then like pushing to GitHub and using like, you know, Git as a version control thing, but then that was like too over the top. So like I think daily notes is kind of a nice middle ground of being really simple and intuitive, but also providing like some level of, oh yeah, this is how I was thinking about it 3 months ago, and now I'm thinking about it like this. And yeah, you kind of like see patterns over how your thoughts evolve, in a way that I think you wouldn't get if the previous versions were like actively hidden or like being overwritten by the latest one.
I like that thinking a lot. That's definitely going to influence the way, definitely going to influence the way that I end up using Roam, using the daily notes, etc. If you follow my Twitter at all, you can probably tell I'm going through a bit of like an existential crisis because of just because of like how trying to write and produce a digital garden is like making me write a lot more of my things outside of Roam, and I'm like, what do I do? But then now that I'm writing outside of that, like it's also making me think, okay, there's all these ways that I could be using Roam better. So like I'm really like rethinking a lot of things. So this is all very helpful for me.
Yeah, it's interesting how the tools influence the actual way that you think, and I think like as we mentioned earlier, Obsidian and Roam, despite being compared as competitors, are actually, they do different things really, really well. And I think like personally, I try and like optimize for the thing that they do well, rather than trying to like merge them together into something that like does a few things not so well. So yeah, it is interesting, and like the way I've used Roam has evolved definitely a lot and keeps evolving, and I'll probably look back at this in a couple of months and wonder what I was doing. But I think that's the great thing about it, is you can do that and it's very flexible. One thing that I will say though that I'm trying to do a little bit more now is like future proof my notes for when I change my mind about how I want to do everything, by like putting this series of complicated date related things at the top of my daily notes. And the reason for that is, well, I first started doing it because I wanted a way to see all of my notes that I'd written in my daily notes in one go, so that I could filter them. So if I click on this daily notes tag, you would see everything that I have ever written in all of my daily notes. I'm not going to click on it because that's going to take ages to load. But that way I can then like filter through like everything that has been in my daily notes. I can like filter and find stuff in, and I couldn't do that before. And I think I was panicking because I would like write random stuff in my daily notes, and if they didn't have a tag that I would revisit often, they would just get lost to the void. So this way I like to that it kind of helps me keep track of things. And also by putting in like the dates here, I can do things like I can look at like week 27 of 2020 and see all of the daily notes for that week. And if I want to start a Substack newsletter, which I'm very much thinking about at the moment, like if I wanted to do a weekly newsletter, then this makes it super easy for me to just like scan back through all of the things I captured in the week, and I can write that up into a weekly newsletter. So so yeah, I really like having this series of tags at the start, even though it kind of looks a bit messy right now. I think it will like future-proof my notes a bit, and things like having this like, is it called ISO date format? I'm not sure exactly, but like this is how Obsidian handles date format. So now if I did want to like export all of this to Obsidian, I would have all of my daily notes tagged with like the Obsidian format for daily notes, and so it would all like nicely link up together. So yeah, that's something I'm finding useful at the moment as like a future-proofing mechanism.
Yeah, that's so intentional. I love that. One of the hardest and most interesting challenges of Roam is that your goals as you use it over time are going to change a lot, you know? Yeah. So it's like, how do you make something that's going to be responsive to the changes that you want to make when you want to make them? Yeah,
exactly. Yeah. And I also, I don't do this manually. This would be a nightmare. I have an Alfred snippet set up, so I can just type keyword and it will like populate my daily notes with this string of stuff and my routine tasks that I do every day, and then my notes retro and things like that. So that like I would definitely encourage people to look at tools like Alfred or text expanders to try and automate some of this stuff that can be a bit too manual at times.
One thing you mentioned in our messages before this was that there's a lot that you were missing about the database structure once
Mm,
you started using Obsidian more and more. And so I'm curious if you
yeah.
could elaborate a little bit on what you found yourself missing as you were writing in files.
One of the main things was the block embeds, and I'm still really struggling with this. Like, for example, on my website, I might want to list out, I don't know, recommended products. So like every time I encounter like a thing that I think is really handy, I might want it to show up in this recommended products page. But maybe I'll also want to reference it in some other place. And in Roam, I would just have a block which is about that product, and then I can reference it like in multiple places, and that's awesome. Whereas, yeah, when I'm writing in Obsidian, I can't really do that, and I can't do it on my website either. So I have to just like copy and paste, and then I have it in two places, and that feels horrible. So I think one of the main things that I really miss about the database aspect when writing Markdown files is this like transclusion idea of being able
Mm-hmm.
to have chunks of text that are reflected in multiple files. So if you make a change to it, then it like changes in multiple files. That's probably one of the main things. I also really miss the filtering aspect. So I think I've mentioned already how much I use filters, like yeah, in any of these pages I have here, you know, or like when I'm writing, like trying to filter down my ideas more easily, queries as well. So like the current workflow I'm using for task management is to have this pinned page, and then I have like a query that pulls in like my pinned tasks, which so that I don't forget about them. And every morning I will like review these and pull the ones I want to work on today into my daily notes. Like those kinds of things you just can't do in a Markdown file. I think there's a way that like Obsidian will hopefully go where they'll have like Boolean search, so I could essentially do like a query using the search bar in Obsidian, so I can like search for all my thoughts that also are about economics or whatever, and it would come up with those things. But currently in Obsidian, the search is like literally just, you know, it finds the word that you search. So it's pretty basic. So I think that was like, I did try for a while, seeing how far I could get with Obsidian as like both my rough thoughts place as well as my more polished thoughts place, and like see if I could not use Roam. But I could like, I really missed this filtering aspect in Roam, and easily searching things and being able to really quickly jot things down in this outliner way, and like move bullets around, like just drag and drop them to get them in the right order and those kinds of things. It's just like you can do those things in a Markdown file by highlighting text and copying and pasting and things like that, but it's just like that level of friction makes it slightly painful. So yeah, so I definitely currently really enjoy the use of both.
Having that granularity of being able to operate on the block level as opposed to having to use a whole page to do something and have your attention go to that specific thing. Yeah, that can definitely be something that I miss as well. You know,
Yeah.
like one of the subtlest things that I love in like a public Roam as a way of doing that is being able to just like any block that needs editing, I just turn into a to do. You know,
Right.
it's that simple of just
Yeah.
being able to look through those to dos and be like, okay, what do I need to edit?
Right.
Whereas like in a file based system, you just can't get that level of granularity.
Yeah. Totally. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I think it's going to be interesting to see how much Obsidian does try to go down that route. Or like, it's tricky because I think one of the great things about Obsidian is how it is just plain Markdown files, and the more fancy features you add, the further you get away from
Yeah.
that nice pure Markdown side of things. So yeah, there's definitely some interesting trade-offs that we'll have to see resolve, I think, in the next few months. But yeah,
Yep.
my sense is it would probably make sense for them not to market themselves as a Roam competitor. I actually don't think they are. I think they don't consider themselves a Roam competitor, and I think yeah, probably it would make sense for them to like be more distinct. I think, but we'll see. Yeah.
Great. Well, this was all so fantastic. Thank you so much for this. One thing I want to ask just before we go, is for anybody who's just getting started with Roam, what would your advice to them be? And to anybody who's just getting started with Obsidian, what would your advice to them
Mm.
be?
Yeah, I think my advice to someone with starting with Roam would be make heavy use of the daily pages and try not to worry too much about filling out the like named pages. Also, just to watch a whole load of YouTube tutorials about all the different ways people are using it. I'm really jealous actually that people now have so many more like onboarding tools,
Yeah.
because I think, yeah, I definitely went down some like dead ends with how I was using it, because I was like making it up as I went along, and there was no, I mean, like people were starting to produce things, but it was for a while there was like really not many examples of how people use the tool. And personally, I find it a lot more useful to see like your videos that you're doing where you give Roam tours, because rather than just like tutorials about certain features, because I think most people can like figure out like, oh, this is how you make a to do, or even like this is how you make a basic query, but it's like, okay, I understand how to do it, but I want to know why. And so watching the YouTube
Hmm.
videos to understand that why, and see how people are using it, and the kind of best practices people are developing, personally I find really useful. So yeah, watch loads of YouTube tutorials to get that side of things. For people getting started with Obsidian, that is a great question. I think, I mean, it's a pretty intuitive tool, given that it's files and um, just, you know, it's plain markdown files. I would say one thing that tripped me up a bit, which is in Roam, tags and pages are basically the same thing. If you put them in double brackets or if you put a hash next to it, it's like the same thing. In Obsidian, that's not the case. And I'm still kind of figuring out when it makes sense to have a page and when it makes sense to have a tag. So I would say, yeah, that might be an interesting thing to think about with Obsidian, is I'm trying to think of a way to future proof it, and I'm not entirely sure. Like probably tags are more for things like journal or question, whereas like actual topics you probably want pages for, but I'm not entirely set on that. So yeah, and I think you can experiment with both. I would say try not to view them as trying to do the same thing, and like you can try exporting your Roam notes and importing them into Obsidian, and definitely that's how I got started, was just like export Roam database, like import it into Obsidian, see what happens when I open these things as markdown files, and it will look very messy because everything will have bullets and that'll be kind of confusing. But you will still have those links like preserved and things like that. And yeah, I would say try and use Obsidian to write up more fully formed thoughts. I think they are working on like a publish option, so you can like literally publish directly from Obsidian, which will be amazing. That will like take a lot of friction out of a lot of people's workflows, I think. So yeah, just like see what happens when you start writing, and use the tools together, and hopefully great things will happen.
Wow, incredible. Well, thank you so much, Rosie. This was an absolute pleasure for me. I know I learned a lot, and I'm really excited for others to be able to learn from this as well.
Awesome, thank you. Yeah, it was great talking to you, and I have also learned a lot from your videos too, so thank you so much for doing these.